Friday, July 13th, 8 o'clock in New York. That is where Alisyn Camerota is. I'm in London. I can't do math, so I don't know what time it is here. But the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, off to a political explosion here, slamming the British Prime Minister in this tabloid interview that published minutes after he had dinner with her last night at Blenheim Palace. She rolled out the red carpet. He pulled it out from underneath her. The President and Prime Minister are behind closed doors at this moment. This is a photo opportunity they had at the beginning of their meetings. They're sort of acting like nothing happened with this tabloid interview, but the president does look a bit uncomfortable there, and he refused to answer a direct question about the interview. We do expect to hear from the president and prime minister again very shortly. They will hold a joint press conference in just minutes. They will be asked. May is trying to remove the United Kingdom from the European Union. He said he would do it differently. He said that she's not taking his advice. What's more, the president heaped praise on the prime minister's chief political rival, saying that Boris Johnson would be a great prime minister. The president also ripped into London's mayor, Sadiq Khan, for his stance on immigration. He said Europe is losing its culture. Those are loaded words with historical significance. So I just spoke with the reporter who interviewed the president. I spoke to him just a few moments ago.
I don't really think the president wants to come here and bring Theresa May a wrapped hand grenade as his welcoming present, which is what he's certainly done. I think he was being honest. I mean, look, you guys know him better than we do. He talks straight and he answers a straight question. Most of the time, perhaps not to CNN every now and then, I also hear. But, you know, he is not a normal politician. He's refreshing. Our politicians talk in riddles most of the time when we ask them questions.
I do not think the British Prime Minister finds him refreshing this morning with that wrapped hand grenade. The president also said he feels unwelcome in London because of the public protests. Many of them are taking place as we speak. I want to begin our coverage with CNN's chief White House reporter Jim Acosta. He is at the Prime Minister's country estate, Chequers. That's about 40 miles outside of London. Jim.
John, that's right. President Trump still making waves across Europe, making a big splash with this interview that he gave the Sun newspaper. As you mentioned, during this interview, he criticized Theresa May's handling of Brexit, her approach for a soft Brexit, and questioned whether or not that would impact trade deals with the United States. He also, as you said, speculated about the possibility of Boris Johnson, the ex-foreign secretary, becoming prime minister. It was fascinating to listen to some of these excerpts from the interview because they made such a huge splash across much of the UK. One of the tabloids here in London said that the president's trip could be summed up this way: the ego has landed. But listen to how the president spoke to the Sun newspaper about Theresa May and her handling of Brexit. Here's what he had to say.
I would have done it much differently. I actually told Theresa May how to do it, but she didn't agree with it. She didn't listen to me. I think the deal that she's striking is not what the people voted on. It's a much different deal than the people voted on. It was not the deal that was in the referendum. If they do that, I would say that would probably end a major trade relationship with the United States. I was very surprised and saddened that he was getting out of government. And you lost some other very good people. Well, I'm not pitting one against the other. I'm just saying I think he'd be a great prime minister.
Now, interestingly, we should point out the president was asked about that interview that he gave the Sun newspaper when he was sitting next to the prime minister just before a bilateral meeting here at Chequers, and the president did not answer that question. He looked visibly irritated, sort of rolled his eyes, and sort of breathed out of his mouth with some disgust when he was asked the question about that. But John, the president made some other explosive comments, as you mentioned in this interview, on the subject of immigration, continuing to use some of the loaded language he uses back in the U.S. when talking about the immigration issue. He used similar language when talking about immigration coming into Europe from other parts of the world. Here's what he had to say about that.
I think what's happened to Europe is a shame. I think the immigration allowing the immigration to take place in Europe is a shame. I think it changed the fabric of Europe. And unless you act very quickly, it's never going to be what it was. And I don't mean that in a positive way.
And the president will obviously be asked about this, we suspect, at a news conference, joint news conference with the prime minister coming up within the next half hour or so. That's going to be what they call a 2+2 press conference. So it should not be as wild and woolly as what we saw after the NATO summit in Brussels, when the president took a number of questions from a whole slew of different reporters. We expect to have two questions from the foreign press. I guess I should call us the foreign press, the American press, and two questions from the British press. But John, getting back to the president's behavior and some of the comments that he's been making, I should tell you, I've been talking to some British diplomatic sources over the last several days, and what they've been saying to me essentially is that the prime minister tries to look past some of the president's remarks when he makes these kinds of uncomfortable comments. They say they try to focus on the policies at stake and the special relationship that exists between the U.S. and the U.K., and not so much the personalities. Of course, Prime Minister Theresa May is sort of on rough footing here in the U.K. when it comes to her political standing because of the way she's handled the Brexit deal. And so the president going in here, very uncharacteristically of an American president, going to a foreign country and almost really meddling in the political affairs of that country. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Theresa May sort of breaks away from that typical British stiff upper lip and really lets us know what she thinks about the president's comments and behavior, because they've had a whole load of it, as you might say, over the last couple of days here over in Europe, John.
All right, Jim Acosta at Checkers. Jim knows it's just a 2-2 press conference, but the British press, they are on fire this morning over this interview. So rest assured, there will be questions for both the president and prime minister on that. I have some live pictures for you. These are protests on the streets of London. These are happening right now. Earlier this morning, that balloon, which has received perhaps too much focus, disproportionate, I think, to its size, only 20 feet. It was flying. It is down now. It was only up for 2 hours. CNN's Aaron McLaughlin live with the protesters on the streets of London. Aaron.
That's right, John. Let me just move out of the way so you can see this scene. This is what organizers have called the Carnival of Resistance. This is the Women's March, marching through Regent Street, a main shopping center here in London. The Women's March seen as the precursor to the larger march, the Stop Trump March, which is expected later today. Organizers tell me that it's fitting that these marches begin with the women. And as you can see, Londoners have gathered on the streets outside to see this march. People have come out of their workplaces. People have come out of their shops. There are tourists here. This is also right over that way is Piccadilly Circus. You can see crowds of people gathering just to take a look at this march. And what they've been chanting is, London, make some noise, as they've been progressing down Regent Street. And really, organizers tell me that their objective here is twofold: to send a message to President Trump that his policies are divisive and not welcome here, but also to send a message to British Prime Minister Theresa May to keep British values in mind when she sits down at the table today. It's a whole cross-section, really, of people here, young and old, from all over the United Kingdom. Some 35 groups involved. I've also talked to plenty of Americans, including Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti. He told me that he was invited by organizers here, that he's here to show Londoners that not all Americans feel the same way as Trump, that he doesn't speak for the entire country. So it seems that even some of the president's foes have followed him across the Atlantic. John.
The presence of Michael Avenatti, perhaps the least surprising thing we've seen here in London this morning. Aaron McLaughlin on the streets of London where these protests are taking place at this moment. Joining me now is Matthew Doyle, former political director for former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and Nicholas Kristof, New York Times columnist. And Nick, I want to start with you here. I had a chance to speak to the political editor of The Sun, Tom Newton-Dunn, who wrote this bombshell article. He used the metaphor, it was a hand-wrapped grenade. You use the same metaphor. You say the president rolled a grenade right into the office of the British Prime Minister.
That's right. I don't think it was wrapped at all. And essentially, he's leaving rubble in London, just as he left rubble at the NATO summit and earlier at the G7 summit. It's, I think poor Prime Minister May is regretting that she ever thought that it would be useful to bring President Trump to London. She very carefully organized things so that he would not be subjected to these protests that you just saw, and arranged this dinner at Blenheim, at Churchill's, his own childhood estate. And I think the idea was to compare Trump with Churchill, but the essence of Churchill's leadership was to try to preserve and protect that special relationship between the UK and the US. And President Trump has just done the opposite. And of course, this sets up the summit with Putin in Helsinki, because if one tries to think what Putin's aims are, then he's obviously very concerned about the benefits that the U.S. has from all these relationships, the security relationships, the trade relationships, and the special relationships with countries like Britain. And it seems to me this is very much serving this is Putin's dream, to blow up these relationships.
Yeah, the timing here is so very important. I should note, if you look up at Checkers right now, we have some live pictures. We see the two lecterns set up. We will hear from the president and the British Prime Minister very shortly. They will hold a joint news conference. They were both asked about this bombshell article that was published overnight. Neither wanted to discuss it. The president was conspicuously quiet about that, Matthew Doyle. And just so our American audience understands, the positions that the president took overnight on Brexit, suggesting that it should be a hard Brexit, not a soft Brexit, and then suggesting that the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson would make a great prime minister. These are exactly what the prime minister did not want to hear.
Correct. What President Trump has got is a script that is straight from Theresa May's domestic political opponents. The pressure that she's got from people, particularly on the right of the Conservative Party, who feel that ultimately she isn't delivering the sort of strong Brexit deal that people were promised in the referendum. Now, of course, there's a whole other debate about the definition of the Brexit referendum, and we can talk about, how you do define what the public wanted in that referendum. And I think the problem is that fundamentally the deal that the public want is undeliverable, which is part of the problem that Theresa May is coming across. But let's be clear, this is not a normal intervention. This is an American president intervening in UK domestic politics. And the reason why you're going to see people who would otherwise champion the special relationship on the streets of London today is precisely because of the personal rhetoric of this president. It's not a reflection of people's views about America as a nation. It is a reflection of what people regard as the racist and misogynist rhetoric of this president in particular.
Nick, I want to ask you a question, because you say what the president did in Brussels, and that was with NATO, obviously, that crucial international organization. What he's done here in the UK with the special relationship, it's taking an axe not just to these organizations, it's taking an axe to the entire post-World War II international order. That's your statement. I guess my question to you is, do the president and his supporters think that it's time to swing that axe?
Yeah, and I do think that President Trump is, I think we have to look at this larger pattern, that what is happening in Britain is part of this broader effort. I think by President Trump, both vis-a-vis his domestic audience, to criticize, to undermine these structures of the Western alliance since since World War II. And also to raise real questions about U.S. support for them around the world. And, it's not just a special relationship with London. It's NATO, which has been the bedrock of our security relations around the world for 69 years.